In this gripping story, a man discovers that his wife has betrayed him and left him for a rich and gray-haired lover. Determined not to let this go unpunished, he invents a devious revenge plan that turns his life into a real thriller. This is a story about complex relationships, betrayal, and unexpected twists of fate. I was born a long time ago, back in Soviet times. My parents at that time did not occupy high positions, and as they could, they lived, bringing me up. My father worked as a steelworker at a metallurgical plant. My mother as a dentist at a railroad hospital. An average Soviet family. My mother was not satisfied with the social status of a simple laborer's wife. She wanted more from family life. A woman dissatisfied with family life and the status of her husband has at least 3 ways. The first, the easiest, is to find someone richer and more successful. Abandon the loser husband and live a happy, and most importantly rich and contented life with a new successful husband. True, in the presence of children, it is not so easy. But who stop the difficulties, especially when the prospect looms sweet future? The child in the bag and forward to a new life. The fate of abandoned once beloved husband is not interested in anyone. At least, immediately after the divorce. It then appears nostalgia for the past life, especially when the new breadwinner is not fully justified expectations. The second way is more difficult. To achieve a high status. Get an education and take a corresponding significant and monetary position. True, and here there is a temptation to leave a worthless husband and make their way through life itself. The fact that the children will be left without a father, and therefore without male influence, is not terrible. She is a strong woman and herself knows what her children need. Shining in society, you can make a friend without burdening yourself with the bonds of marriage. An easy relationship, not obliging to anything. Never mind that eventually the children grow up and disperse to their families. Main status is successful and strong, but single. And finally, the hardest way. Make the husband himself to make his way in life and achieve a high position in society. And this is, above all, higher education and the ability to get along with people. Convince the husband to put all his efforts in this direction. Not an easy task. Where persuasion, where blackmail, where threats, but to achieve their goal. And make her husband a high-ranking executive. But at the same time, not to turn into an appendage of the spouse and not get lost in the shadow of his greatness. My mother took the hardest path. She had a boyfriend before my father. They were quite serious. A boy from the family of an instructor of the district party committee. A major, by today's standards. Mom was a very beautiful and charming girl, able to attract a man of any age. Everything was going to the wedding, but her beauty played a cruel joke. In it, desperately fell in love with her father Majorkic, a 40-year-old functionary of the district committee. It is clear that Mon, the prospect of becoming the mistress of aging, by her standards, Lovelasia, did not inspire. Under the influence of his father, Majorkic soon married the daughter of the director of the crib factory, quite ugly, but very promising in all respects to Vitsa. Mom was very worried about the breakup with her lover, but to go to his daddy's mistress flatly refused. She fell into depression, rightly believing that all men unscrupulous bastards and goats, and rely on their nobility stupid. And just at this difficult time for my mom, my father returned from the army. Having served in the Soviet Navy, the prescribed 3 years, he arrived in his hometown. The whole world lay at his feet, and the future seemed clear and cloudless. It was like that until he saw a blonde and slender beauty at a dance and lost his head. He lost his head, he lost himself. But the beauty did not rush into the arms of the brave sailor. Taught by life, she was looking for a man established in life, and was very afraid to make a mistake in the choice. She was only in the way. Yes, it should be noted, she had paid attention to Chernyavievi, a gypsy-like fellow, but no more. He didn't inspire confidence. He was neither a man nor a potential groom. My father did everything he could to win the favor of an unapproachable girl. He walked her home and chased away the suitors, all to no avail. Then he took a desperate step. He followed her home from work and told her he loved her, and finally promised her that he would win her favor at any cost, even by force. And even if he went to jail, she'd still be his. Another would have been indignant, complained to my father, or run to the police. But my mom thought about it. He's a good-looking guy. He's got girls with Timmy all over him. He's not a fool, and maybe it'll work out. No, she didn't love him. Her heart still yearned for her favorite major. But life had to be arranged somehow, and she began to treat her swarthy beau more favorably. Father by that time got a job at the metallurgical plant as a steelworker in the pipe foundry. Not a job for weaklings. He wasn't a wimp. Service in the Navy hardened the guy, and despite the seeming slackness, he had a real nail rod inside. That's what the unapproachable beauty felt. Literally and figuratively. When the sailor learned that his girlfriend was pregnant, he did not hesitate and immediately proposed to sign. In May, they got married. And the next spring, I was born. Mom had time to finish dental school and worked as a doctor. They lived like that for 3 years when a major came to town. By that time, his father had already become secretary of the notorious district party committee and aspired to new party heights. Family life, Major failed, and he, leaving his once promising wife with young children, returned to his hometown. Obviously, he immediately began to look for a meeting with his former lover. He came to my mom at work with flowers and offered to leave her husband and take the child, that is, me, and reunite. Mom looked at him with loving eyes. A dream come true, her beloved with her. She sat as if under hypnosis, willing to do anything for him. For 5 whole minutes. My mother was a strong woman, despite her outward fragility. Yes, she didn't love her husband much, to put it mildly. But her son was his. To leave a child without a father. To deprive her husband of his own child. He had nothing to do with her. On the contrary, my father never gave her any reason to suspect him of infidelity. And most importantly, my mother never forgave the betrayal. Once betrayed, betrayed again. She silently listened to the stream of consciousness of her former beau and caught herself thinking that her feelings for him had faded. Moreover, the more he spoke of his love for her, the more she despised him. How pathetic and worthless he seemed to her. But the husband. Mother suddenly realized how dear her steelworker was to her. How desirable his calloused palms seemed. Her heart ached in sweet languor. And she wanted to go home to her son and husband. Having listened to the end of the monologue Majorcic, she thanked him for the coffee, wished him success in his personal life, and left, leaving her suitor with nothing. He tried to meet her again, but her mother said that she would tell her husband about everything. And he has a heavy hand, not without reason works as a steelworker. Her admirer disappeared for a while, and my mother took up with my father. She persuaded him to enroll in the Institute of Mechanical Engineering at the evening faculty. After 6 years of study, my father received a higher engineering education. A year later, he was transferred as a safety engineer. Then he became the head of the pipe foundry shop, the main shop at the enterprise. By the age of 40, he sat in the chair of the general director of the metallurgical plant. And after the collapse of the USSR, he became its de facto owner. Some time later, my father joined the board of directors of the newly created metallurgical company and took the post of chairman. My mother also did not waste time and did not get bogged down in everyday life. Leaving me in the care of my grandmothers, she enrolled in medical school on a full-time basis and after 7 years became a certified dentist. She worked in a polyclinic and had a private practice. Over time, with the help of her father, she opened a dental clinic. At some point on the horizon again loomed suitor. Several times he tried to meet with his former lover, but he failed. By that time, Mom realized that she truly loved her father. As they say, we'll get along. and immediately canceled all the attempts of the hapless ex to restore relations. By the way, my parents lived together for almost 60 years and died almost on the same day. To say that my family lived in prosperity, it is nothing to say. My parents could afford almost anything, but only for themselves. They were very afraid that I would grow up to be a brainless wastrel who didn't know the value of money. So I went to an ordinary school and didn't say much about who my ancestors were. Everyone thought that my father was a simple engineer and my mother was a dentist. If I needed money for my desires, my father willingly gave me a job at the plant, according to my strength and capabilities. During vacations, I swept shavings in the shop, worked as a watchman, and made boxes for consumer goods. When my classmates started getting pregnant by senior year, no one took me into account. I was not part of the cohort of enviable suitors, and all the small mall smarmy girls bypassed me, despite my rather attractive appearance. I dressed simply without frills. A simple suit, cheap jeans from the department store, and a t-shirt of domestic production. That's pretty much all I could afford. Just an ordinary horse from a low-income, intelligent family. My classmates, having more or less wealthy parents, flaunted in branded jeans, bought from the farmer for mad money, stunning t-shirts, batniki, and fancy fur coats. Japanese stereos and their own cars completed the image of complete majors, who had no choice from similar girls who looked like to the Pyrenees, so eager to tear off a piece of fat. It is clear that all these delights were bought with parental money. In the 8th grade, I became interested in playing the guitar. I was so struck by this instrument that I spent all my free time pulling the strings of an old 7-string guitar with the last string removed. First chords, first psalms. The music sucked me in, and I didn't notice anything around me. At the beginning of the 9th grade, I decided to go to a music studio to learn classical guitar. 2 things were necessary for this: money for studies and a good instrument. I earned money for studies on vacation, but with a good guitar, the situation was bad. My old domestic seam string, which my mom's brother gave me, was no good. I had no money to buy a more or less decent Czechoslovak guitar. My parents considered my hobbies as another bliss and did not pay attention to it, especially my father. Then I took up with my mom. One evening, when my father wasn't home, I sang her some songs from her youth. Nostalgia is a great thing. Mom even wept. And when I thought she had softened, I gently asked her for the necessary amount. Tears for tears, but Mom didn't swim away from my howling, broken voice. She listened to me without saying anything definite. I had to start my studies with what I had. Time passed. I persistently cut my fingers on the hard strings, but I didn't give up studying. By the new year, the first successes appeared. I could play the classics of guitar music. Sometimes in the evenings, I closed myself in my room and played and sang with ecstasy. I thought my ancestors were indifferent to my hobby, but I was wrong. All this time, my mother was closely watching my studies and finally realized that it was serious. She had a long talk with my father and they made a decision. In March, when I turned 14, I was given a German classical guitar. It cost fantastic money and was my unattainable dream. Then a piano came into the house. They took me out of the studio and started inviting teachers home. Piano, guitar, singing. By the time I graduated from high school, I played and sang beautifully with a well-pitched voice and was going to continue my studies and enter the conservatory. But then my father intervened. Music wasn't serious. As a hobby, yes. A life bonus, nothing more. But a man should have in his hands a specialty that can sustainably feed him and his future family. My mother supported him, and I enrolled in a mechanical engineering institute, the same one my father graduated from. But at the same time, I began to study at the variety department of the music school. You can't carry what you know over your shoulders. My parents were sympathetic to my decision. An extra diploma wouldn't hurt. In the institute, I still did not spread about my life, so that my classmates, and especially classmates, remained in the dark about who my parents are. I studied well. In the evenings I worked part-time, playing an old broken piano in a cafe. I wanted to buy myself a good electric guitar. My dream was to play in a band. We had bands at the institute, but the number of people who wanted to play in them exceeded the demand, and it deprived me of any chances. Besides, nobody wanted to take a guitarist without a guitar. In my 3rd year, I got a girlfriend. She studied in our stream in a parallel group. A pretty blonde girl named Diana. New Year's Eve, we met together, but the intimacy has not yet come. But it was getting there fast. I still don't understand why I didn't notice her for 3 years of school. And then we crossed paths at a lecture at the beginning of the 4th year. And that was it. I was struck to the heart. My whole world centered on her. I thought about her all the time, tried to catch her gaze, watched her every move. She seemed to me the ideal of feminine beauty. Anyway, I confessed my love to her, and in December we got married. We were assigned a room in the dormitory, a small one, but it was ours. For the first few months, we couldn't get enough of each other. I literally blew dust off her. After 2 months of living together, Diana became pregnant. My happiness was unbelievable. When they did an ultrasound and it became clear that it was a girl, I cannot describe my condition. But soon I began to notice that Diana was struggling with a pregnancy. She didn't seem too excited about the prospect of becoming a mother. I put it down to the peculiarities of the female body, thinking it was a side effect of pregnancy. For some reason, every husband thinks he's an expert on the female body. Diana became irritable, avoided my company. Being pregnant, she nevertheless began to leave the house more and more often, to attend entertainment events, to meet with friends. I tried to talk some sense into her, worrying about the baby, but it was all in vain. She became more and more distant from me. Then began some strange calls at night. Diana would jump out of bed to talk in the middle of the night and lock herself in the bathroom, citing toxemia. But I could hear her talking to someone in there. I put up with it all patiently, believing that in the end, it was the baby that mattered. At the due date, the ambulance took Diana away to give birth. It was October, and I sat on a bench outside the hospital all night. In the morning, a sleepy nurse in a crumpled robe told me that the baby girl was stillborn. The world fell apart. I had nothing left, no hope, no meaning in life. That same day, after lunch, I took Diana home. She was terribly depressed. She sat there all the time, staring at one point. The next day, she went to her mother in our hometown, arguing that she could not stay at home. Everything annoyed her. A week later, a friend called me and told me that Diana had not gone anywhere, but was living with some man. I didn't believe it at first, but my friend gave me the address and advised me to sit at the entrance. After a while, I saw Diana with a well-groomed gray-haired man. I didn't immediately recognize my wife. She was laughing ingratiatingly and holding him under her arm. It was as if this terrible tragedy with our daughter hadn't happened. I inwardly shuddered at such hypocrisy. I'll be honest, even outright infidelity didn't faze me like that. I didn't hide the desire to punch both of them in the face, but I restrained myself. I turned around and went home. A week later, Diane showed up. She was the grief of the world. Pale, tears in her eyes, she showed me her grief in every way possible. I almost vomited with squeamishness. Anyway, I showed her the pictures and told her I was aware of her affair. The reaction was predictable. Loser, loser, all because of you. She is unintentionally dragging a miserable existence. She deserves better. I listened to her screams in silence, realizing that I no longer have a wife or a daughter. Diane left the institute, filed a divorce with me, and left with a new beau, not that in Moscow, not that in St. Petersburg. I didn't care where she was or what happened to her. Her new boyfriend was a banker or a businessman. I suppose he could provide Diana with the standard of living she was asking for. I graduated from college, got a degree in engineering, and asked to join the army. I served in an interesting branch of the military, and I dare to think I was a pretty good squad leader. On demo bowl, I left with pumped up muscles and a tattoo of a life mouse on my left forearm. When I was becoming unbearably painful longing, I took a guitar in my hands and played. Having returned to citizenship, it was necessary to start a new life. The guys offered me to play in a nightclub. Live performance was becoming fashionable again, and musicians were in the trend. I played quite well, and I even got some fans. But I still didn't have enough money, and at one time, I even worked part-time as a caretaker at a kindergarten. Eventually, my father's patience ran out. We had a serious conversation with him, after which I was offered the position of chief engineer at one of his factories. I received good money, and in 6 months, I was able to buy a car. Life was getting better. My mom had also risen quite well. I borrowed money from her and invested it, as it seemed to me, in a promising project. So I worked at the factory and played at the club twice a week. It is clear that I did not spread about my daily life, and everyone thought that I was a musician with a bad fate. Not only that, no one knew it was my club. It was where I had invested the money I had borrowed from my mother. I appointed a friend of mine as the manager and put him in charge of recruiting the staff. He was the only one who knew the true owner of the place. Soon, I bought an apartment in a residential area and moved there from my parents. It became possible to communicate more closely with gender partners. However, they did not stay with me for long. It was a good inoculation from family life. But once in a club, I met a pretty girl, Tatiana. She was older than me, and it stirred the blood in anticipation of new sensual sensations. I invited her home for coffee, after which we somehow imperceptibly moved to the horizontal position. Having successfully mastered the complex of physical exercises, after a while we moved to the kitchen. And there my new friend found an album with photos from my past life. School, institute, army. Even a couple of pictures of Diana, though I thought I'd torn them all up and thrown them away. I noticed a long time ago that almost all women love to look at family photos of their lover. Maybe they're looking for some sacred meaning that only they know. Tatiana began to look at the pages of an old album for a long time, even commenting on something. And suddenly she exclaimed, "I know her." She held a photo of Diana in her hand. She was lying in a maternity hospital in such and such a city. I used to work there. Well, it's true what they say, small world. I didn't pay much attention to what she said, so what? But Tatiana continued, "Can you imagine how mean women can be? She gave birth to a healthy little girl, and then immediately refused to give her up. Wait, Tanya, she gave birth to a dead baby." I even stood up with excitement. No, I remember well. I prepared the baby girl for transfer to the orphanage. You'll have to check with the headmistress. Not much time has passed, and she should remember. Listening to my friend, I was already dialing my father's number. Probably for the first time in my life, I asked him for help. 2 hours later, my father, Tatiana, and I were rushing to the city. In the morning, we were already in the maternity hospital. The headmistress resisted for a long time, but finally gave in under my father's pressure. Yes, she remembers, a young woman, Diana Sabitskaya, gave birth to a healthy baby girl. But she refused to give her up right away, wouldn't even look at her. Apparently, she made her decision in advance. A man came to her, who paid money and asked to present everything as if the child was born dead. All this was done with the knowledge of Diana Sabitskaya's mother. About the reasons for such an act, neither the mother nor her companion did not spread. A day later, the girl was sent to a baby home. The headmistress sobbed, smearing tears on her cheeks, and begged me and the father not to hand her over to the police. But my father brushed it off with his hand. We didn't care about her. My father's money had done its magic. We went through the whole chain, and in 2 hours we were already at the orphanage where the girl had been transferred. Luckily for us, she wasn't adopted. My dad and I sat in the principal's office while the child care provider went to get her. I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest. When the 5-year-old girl walked into the room, my dad and I looked at each other. It was the spitting image of my mom as a child. Exactly the same. There was no doubt about it. It was my daughter. "Baby, what's your name?" I whispered in a voice that didn't belong to me. "Jenya." She looked up at me with her sky blue eyes like my mom's. "Are you my daddy? I knew you'd come for me." I took her in my arms. My daughter was with me. Nothing else mattered anymore. The evening began as usual. I turned on the microphone, made myself comfortable on the chair, and habitually put my hands on the keys, absorbing the energy of the instrument. My heart was sad, and I wanted to start with something lyrical, more like blues. I sat silently, tuning into the music, and grandpa I was, as usual. Budget jeans and a white shirt. The saving grace was that the small bandstand where the old piano stood was dimly lit, and my figure leaning over the keys was not conspicuous. The hall was noisy. It seemed as if the people gathered here were celebrating some event that was very important to everyone. As if our national soccer team had finally won the European Championship, and this very evening, the years' accumulated stock of unrealized joy had burst out into the open and raged to the evil of all enemies. "Hi." A familiar waiter put a cup of coffee in front of me. "The crowd is full. 3 plans have already been made." "Congratulations." I finished my coffee, which had already cooled down, and took the first chord. I didn't play loudly, and my music couldn't cover the noise in the hall. It was just background music, nothing more. I was playing old New York blues. I played in my favorite tonality leminer, which gives me the opportunity to improvise. My fingers were moving over the keys, voicing the main theme. In the music, I heard the sound of rain falling on gray city streets, the laughter of couples in love, seeking shelter from its cold jets, the rustling of yellow cabs whizzing by, dispersing puddles in which the light of multicolored advertisements splashed, and the longing of a lonely heart. The longing for the woman, the one, the only, the beloved, and the unattainable. The one who chose the rich and successful over the simple working man. The one who left the man she once loved without hesitation, stepped over his feelings, and, like a comet, sped off after a beautiful and shiny, like a new car, life. I cut myself off from everything. From the smoky hall, from the noise of conversations, from the shrill laughter of smeared girls. I drowned in the music. My fingers played by themselves, improvising and forgetting about me. I'd never been to New York. My idea of it probably had little to do with reality. But that's how I saw it. A stone jungle and a lonely heart lost in it. My soul soared over the vast city, in the autumn rain and cold stars staring indifferently at the gray, wet streets. At last, my fingers ran through 2 octaves and froze. There was a piercing silence in the hall. People looked at the stage, and some had tears in their eyes. Waiters with trays in their hands froze, and even the barmaid, Auntie Clava, looked out of the embrasure of her cupboard, wiping her reddened eyes with a handkerchief. There were lonely claps, which gradually turned into applause. Someone even shouted bravo. But everything ends and returns to normal. Soon the hall was habitually noisy. Knives and forks clattered on plates. Girls laughed shrilly. I bowed and began to pack. The time was late, and I still had a long way to go home. Colleagues musicians were going to celebrate some regular event here in the club, but I refused. The hustle and rumble of a night disco stressed me out. Especially tomorrow, I had to go to work, and then to the airport. I was not a professional musician and played here on Wednesdays and Saturdays. They even tried to pay me some ridiculous money, which was impossible to live on. And it wasn't really about the money. I just needed some kind of respite, an opportunity to get away for a while from the daily routine of current affairs. Well, it seems that's all. After putting on my jacket and nodding to the guys, I went to the exit. "Igor," I turned around. "I didn't expect to see you here. Beautiful and well-groomed young lady showered me with a scent of expensive perfume, capriciously curled her lips. But it couldn't be otherwise. A pub is your thing. She smiled squeamishly. Though you still play well. Hello, Diana. It's good to see you too. I tried to force a smile out of myself. I see you caught your bluebird. Standing in front of me was the woman who broke my life. Destroyed all my hopes for simple human happiness. Standing there smiling as if nothing had happened, hating and despising me at the same time. Yeah, a loser like me belongs in a pub. Honey, you're all right. Some slippery metrosexual came up to us and took the woman under his arm. I'm fine, love. Just ran into an old acquaintance. Without saying anything, I walked around the sweet couple and headed for the exit. It was late fall and rain was drizzling outside. Lighting up a cigarette, I raised my collar and walked leisurely along the dark and wet from the fall dampness of the houses. Unconscious Tasca sane little heart and melted the back of my neck. Okay, 100 grams of whiskey and moping as never happened. My Porsche stood in its usual place, resting its front wheels on a low curb. Carelessly throwing my jacket on the back seat, I sat down in the driver's seat. The car started instantly and rumbled like a cat before dinner. It took about an hour to get home, but I still didn't go to the apartment for the night. Despite the rainy weather, I liked to go to my country house. The crackling of hot logs in the fireplace, the amber color of good whiskey, and most importantly, the silence relaxed my soul, pushing out all the anxiety and longing of sleepless nights. I left the car in the driveway, picked up my jacket, and climbed the steps to the porch. Claudia Yakovlevna had already left, but dinner was on the table. A note lay next to it. Igor, my mother called several times, asking you to call back. I just now remembered that I turned off my cell phone before the show, so I dialed my mom's number. Mom answered right away. Igor, you remember we're flying in tomorrow. She was in her repertoire. You must meet us. Janijka misses you very much. Mom, I'll be there. Don't worry. I've prepared warm clothes for my daughter. Everyone is waiting for you, especially Janijka. Claudia Yakovlevna baked Napoleon for her. Good, Igor. Dad sends his regards. Mom's out. Yes, Mom was quick to take on the role of grandmother. Dad's still a little resistant, but he's got his granddaughter in his arms. He and Genya went on a month's vacation to Cyprus. They're coming back tomorrow. By 2 o'clock, the driver took me to the airport. I was standing in the crowd of people meeting me when I noticed a young, spectacular woman. Diana. She was getting in my way a lot. My ex-girlfriend was looking for someone in the arrivals crowd. Finally, she saw me and waved hello. Of course, noble gray hair. He embraced my ex-wife and kissed her as if not even though. But his gaze was directed over her shoulder at the charming young blonde, who sent him a brief air kiss. Daddy. That loud ringing voice I would have recognized from 1,000. Genya put her arms around my neck and kissed me. I missed you so much. People turned around and looked at us with a smile. Diana turned around at the children's voice, too, and froze. Her face suddenly wrinkled. It looked like the woman was about to burst into tears. Diana looked at me and Genya without looking away. With a shaking hand, she pressed the handkerchief to her throat. The wheel of fate had turned. She understood everything. When we were getting into the car, in the window of the waiting room, the figure of a young, beautiful woman, a woman who had killed her own happiness, was clearly visible.